Hello and welcome to our training that will dig into some definitions of intergenerational trauma. This is a real-life image of intergenerational and ancestral trauma over millennia. And if you scaled it, it would probably be 1,000 times the size. What we're talking about is something that began long before we were born, that's affected hundreds of generations, and that can't be separated from racism and systemic oppression in post-colonial times. And this is why I'm using the term undefinable, because we will never be able to fully know or fully sense the magnitude of intergenerational trauma. And it's probably a good thing, because it would probably be really overwhelming. Rather than seeing the full picture, we get only limited glimpses of how trauma is showing up, whether that's for us or for others in our immediate family. It's hard to grieve ancestors we don't know, places we've never been to, and a language we were never taught. So much information is lost or has been hidden due to slavery and forced migration. And the erasure of culture by white supremacy means that we often don't know where to place our grief. Knowing what happened is also equally devastating, and it's still ambiguous if you don't have all the details or the trauma stems from people who have passed away. Intergenerational trauma has a way of staying dormant for decades and then springing up out of the blue when family members open up unexpectedly, or when an unconscious memory that's been buried for years comes to the surface. That can bring up a lot of grief, and it can feel like the grief process is starting from scratch. Intergenerational trauma looks something like this. It's the very center of the Venn diagram, where there's overlap between the known and the unknown. Whenever I read a definition of intergenerational trauma, there's usually something missing. So on the screen, instead of providing one specific definition, I've included the main areas that are impacted by intergenerational trauma and a couple of examples that illustrate how it might show up. It's possible to pick up a mixture of thoughts, feelings, behaviors, beliefs, as well as entire value systems and relating patterns from our family and our ancestors. And it brings up the challenge of trying to discern what's really ours and what isn't. Intergenerational trauma doesn't mutate our genes, it alters gene expression and how our genes are read. And this process is known as epigenetics. They're basically tiny chemical tags that are added to or removed from our DNA in response to changes in our environment. These tags mean that genes can be adapted to changing conditions without actually affecting the genome itself. For example, a 2015 study found that the children of Holocaust survivors had higher levels of cortisol, which is a stress hormone. But more research is still needed in this area, as the sample size in that particular study was quite small. This area of trauma literally has so many different terms that are also overlapping, so it can be a bit confusing. And so that we're all on the same page, when we talk about intergenerational trauma, it's the trauma between generations, while intragenerational is the trauma that's happening within a generation. Generational is often used when we're talking about wealth, and it's a blend of inter and intra-generational. Trans, meaning across, is specifically trauma that's passed down to descendants, not directly affected by an event. So that could be trauma that is felt by great-great-grandchildren who weren't alive at the time that something was happening. Multi means many or various, and generally is a less common term when talking about this area of trauma. Historical trauma would be something like enslavement that's affected a specific racial group. Collective trauma, an example of this would be COVID-19 that affected our entire community, even if for some individuals the impact wasn't felt in such a devastating way compared to others. And lastly, ancestral trauma that goes back generations. It's less about what we inherit from our parents, but more about the broader family line. We can't talk about intergenerational trauma without bringing in resilience, especially because Black communities are such a beautiful example of surviving against all odds with grace, humor, and courage. Here are some examples of intergenerational resilience, and of course there are more. It's really anything that we've inherited that adds value to our existence. take a moment to list what you've inherited that generates something positive for you and for the people that you're in connection with. And once you've done that, that brings our session on defining the undefinable to a close. I hope it's been helpful, and I will see you in the next session.